What comes into your mind when you think about drylands? An image of a dusty, windswept landscape? A place where it is hard to survive, let alone thrive? This podcast series may just change your mind. Welcome to Dynamic Drylands, the podcast from SPARC. SPARC is a research program which looks into the future of the drylands of Africa and the Middle East. The podcast is hosted by Bola Mosuro.
Hello, I'm Bola Mosuro, a journalist who spent more than 30 years working for the BBC World Service. And in this series, Dynamic Drylands, I'm getting much closer to understanding the reality of pastoralists and farmers' lives. And I've been speaking with pastoralists, researchers, innovators, and aid workers to find out more about the fast-changing pace of life in these lands. And I'm asking, what needs to change to help herders and farmers better navigate the challenges they face in the long term?
This is episode 3, Inside the Economic Engine of the Drylands.
For the pastoralists, agro-pastoralists and farmers who call drylands home, these semi-arid areas are tough terrains to live in. But they're also a source of pride. For herders, they feel at one with their land and the livestock that they tend, whether that's cows, goats, sheep or camels. They know the crucial role they play in society and how they're integral to the food chain. After all, Africa's pastoralists provide more than 75% of the continent's milk and more than half of its meat. We've heard in episodes 1 and 2 about some of the complex challenges people who live in the drylands face.
The problem is that the more that land in the pastoral landscape is given to crops, often coming from land that was previously used for grazing, the more that pastoral lands become fragmented and livestock movement is blocked. And that collective land use, the landscape, is broken up into pieces, which causes problem for pastoralists, but also for the other land users in that landscape.
In this episode, you'll be hearing about the economic engine of the drylands, or how markets, trade, and new financial arrangements are helping people to adapt and thrive in such challenging situations. Livestock markets are a good place to start to get a better understanding of how people are impacted by shocks and can be an important way to help them manage uncertainty. Our guides in this episode are researchers and development workers who look at markets and those whose lives and livelihoods centre around livestock. I spoke with Carmen Jaquez, who works for the international NGO Mercy Corps. She's a Director of Evidence and Learning for Dryland Production Systems and has been working across different countries in Africa for many years. Carmen explained the importance of livestock markets.
When we talk about dryland livestock market systems, it's really focused on primarily pastoralists who are producing the animals out on the rangelands, and then they're caring for those animals, and at some point in time they're taking them into these smaller markets where the animals continue to be aggregated and taken to sort of the consumer markets where the consumers are. Now, why these are very important in the drylands, one thing especially for the drylands across Africa, it's not a good crop agriculture growing system. That we have very low rainfall. The soils may not be the best for some of the crops for agriculture, such as maize, beans. So in the drylands, livestock markets are the economic engine. It is the primary livelihood for people, and it creates many of the jobs that are out there, whether those be traders or transporters, people who run veterinary shops, people who provide other support to livestock production. So it's really the economic driver in the drylands. It allows people to get that income to be able to buy food.
Carmen Jaquez. Before we go further, let's hear about some of the people involved in markets. Have you ever seen a lone shepherd boy or herder surrounded by animals and wondered about his life, his responsibilities, even the family that depends on him tending his flock? Well, I have. So there's no better way to find out more about this life than from a former herder. I spoke with Dr. Diba Wako, who works today as Director of the Regional Livestock Programme at Mercy Corps. He's a specialist in livestock, rangeland management and animal health. Diba was born into a family of pastoralists in Marsabit County, in the north of Kenya.
You move into cycles of hell, which is basically drought, stench of death everywhere. I still have a scar on my hand, and that was caused by a knife. I was trying to desperately salvage skin from the calves that died in the 1991 drought. It was the worst I can remember. It's what I would say, if not hell, very close to hell. The heaven part for me, for sure, is the livestock. And seeing them thrive, seeing them, produce so well for the owners. I mean, it's much more than just keeping some animals.
I was taken by how passionate and dedicated Diba was to his flock. His love for his animals was so apparent, and my heart broke for this young boy trying to salvage something from the precious cattle lost to drought. And as Diba shared, even as a young boy, he remembered the impact of drought. And 30 years on, the droughts and repeated failed rains have led to mass migration, even deaths among pastoralists and their livestock. You'll be hearing more from Diba in episode 4. One of those at the forefront of trying to mitigate the effects of these shocks is Dr. Rupsha Banerjee. She's a senior scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute, or ILRI. Rupsha has worked in a number of countries across Africa, where she witnessed firsthand the impact that multiple shocks can have.
The shocks are actually kind of like they keep being hit by them every now and then, to the extent that they just can't seem to catch a break. It's like if there is a drought, followed by a drought, there is heavy rains, and then if the rains stop, then there is a disease attack, and then if nothing else happens, then randomly from nowhere, there is a locust attack or some random insect attack. So it's something that keeps on happening every now and then. But it's an ecosystem by itself, and they have had processes and ways by which they have coped. Of course, being the pastoral community, the migration has been one of the ways of like looking or sustaining themselves, going from one place to another. But one of the impacts that happens is when these kind of shocks keep coming, is that the herd is the one that gets affected the most, and they get completely wiped out. And then the cycle of regeneration is quite tough. Specifically for the herders, of course, they lose their livestock. For the traders, they don't get the kind of animals that they would want to, and this also affects livestock exports. And for the farmers, I think in this case, even though primarily the pastoral areas are for the livestock herders, but there are certain patches where there is crops which are grown but which are more feeder crops, like the agropastoral areas. So what happens is that for them, they don't get the necessary clients, and actually as a result of that, they also don't get the kind of input supply that they would want for the livestock or even to grow them. So it's like kind of like a vicious circle. And I think more than anything else among all of them is that besides the migration bit of it, of course, there is destocking that they do. That is kind of like usually the knee-jerk reaction that happens, that whenever there is a shock, the animals are sold, or like some of the weak animals are slaughtered. But clearly, this is not something that is sustainable. So I think as we are thinking and as we are going more and more into the area of where there is immense climate variability, climate change is a huge factor. We need to start thinking of tools, or we need to think of means which can sort of complement the existing coping strategies of the pastoral community. Yeah.
Dr. Rupsha Banerjee. And she works with others at ILRI to strengthen capacity and develop financial measures which herders can use to navigate these crises. One of her colleagues is the economist Dr. Kelvin Shikuku. Kelvin carries out research into index-based livestock insurance, otherwise known as ILRI. And that's a way of supporting herders through these shocks. Now, most insurance schemes compensate for losses that have already happened. In contrast, ILRI schemes attempt to prevent the losses. They use satellite imagery in order to monitor the condition of vegetation. So when pastures become severely depleted, the schemes pay out before the livestock begins to die. This injection of cash can help farmers prepare for the coming shock and gives them more opportunities to decide what to do. Calvin has carried out trials of ILRI among the Samburu people of north-central Kenya who are semi-nomadic pastoralists. He's particularly interested in creating a form of insurance that works for women who are typically excluded from these services.
We started working with groups in Samburu. The objective of this program was to help women form groups, but also to provide important business skills and life skills, and then match them with the mentor who, let's say, works with them for a period of about 18 months. After that period, they graduate and they can establish a business of their choice, right? We then felt that when shocks were happening, the little assets, the little businesses that they had started quickly got depleted, right? And I mean, they liquidated those, and even the little money they had made was not sufficient to take them far. And so clearly there was a need here to find another way to strengthen that program. And that's when we brought in the livestock insurance component. The novelty of it being, again, that we actually framed insurance in ways that, again, spoke directly to the risks that women face, but also the needs of the women. And so that we saw that when you frame insurance in ways that speak directly to the needs of the women, that not only the take-ups go up significantly, but also that they were able to grow their assets, but those assets were actually more resilient to shocks over a sustained period of time.
How did the insurance work in this context of the drylands?
The insurance had to be framed in ways that actually speak to the needs of the women. And what I mean here is that for this to come out clearly is that you have to think about how the standard insurance product is designed, right? Mostly that's like in tropical livestock units framing, right? So you buy insurance so that you can, protect, let's say, X number of livestock. But we did not want to frame it that way because, not many women, for example, own cattle or even control those livestock. So essentially, if you frame it that way, then you're potentially locking out this important group of pastoralists. Yeah. So what this framing does is that then it just requires them to buy family units of insurance for whatever number of family members they would want to buy for. So when we asked women, indeed, this was something that they found was more appealing to them. It spoke directly to their needs. That increased the uptake rates for the insurance product. But more importantly, what we see is that when women took up this product, they were not only able to grow their assets, right, let's say back to pre-shock levels, but actually the assets grew to even higher levels, like before, to levels higher than where they were even before the shock happened. And so that's a positive impact here, right? It's not only important that people can bounce back to where they were before the shock happened, but I think what is important here is that it's important to put people on that self-sustaining growth path.
Now, whilst Kelvin has seen the index-based livestock insurance to be effective, it isn't the only financial measure that herders can use in the drylands. Here's Carmen Jaquez from Mercy Corps again.
There's many different ways that communities can be supported. The index-based livestock insurance is one tool. I think that what is really important when we go about doing this work is that there's no one answer. You need to be layering on, and graduation itself is an approach, and the layering in of index-based livestock insurance was a realization that we need to add on additional interventions, additional activities. And so similarly, when we see products such as the ILRI, the index-based livestock insurance, it's a financial product. We're increasingly seeing it as part of a safety net program. So as part of something that the government may be giving or donors may be giving out to vulnerable communities. But That index-based livestock insurance is designed to help protect animals. It may not be enough resource, enough finances, or enough cash to care for all of the animals, but it allows households to identify which animals they really want to make sure survive through and then sell off. So the example would be female animals. You want to protect those animals through a drought, because when they restore their life, when people start rebuilding their livelihoods, they need those younger female animals of good, what we say, good reproductive age, to be able to start having offspring after the drought. So products such as ILRI allow people to make decisions on their own herd management and to some degree their household management. But it doesn't work if they're not affordable animal health services, if they're not affordable hay or affordable water services. It doesn't matter if they have that cash. They may change the use of that cash just to meet their own food needs and not protect their animals. We can never look at these as, oh, there's a solution. There's one piece to a much larger solution, and we need to be addressing all of those together.
Carmen's point is crucial when speaking about challenges facing pastoralists. There's no one solution or silver bullet to overcoming these challenges. And as Carmen says, layering solutions means people are able to make their own decisions. And Rupcha says the most effective interventions come from properly understanding and developing these informal solutions.
The thing about getting access to these financial products, or even thinking around like how some of the examples that Carmen gave, is that you have to have, number one, an understanding from the donor perspective or the aid agencies, that how do they operate and what is it that makes them tick. One of them that makes them tick is the informal system. We are not saying that we should formalize the entire informal system, but how can you really be innovative and creative to actually tap onto some of the things that they are doing? That's number one. Second thing is that the part that there is such a huge informal system at play that is somehow completely ignored. And people want to start from saying, let's start a credit scoring. And as far as the credit scoring is concerned, the parameter is, how many times have you borrowed and returned from a formal financial institution? So if one were to actually come up with an element of trust and to make these communities trust systems, that would be also creating some kind of innovations in terms of understanding what would a credit scoring system look like for a pastoral herder, or for a woman, or for or a trader, for example. Honestly, in the last 20-25 years, the amount of money that has been pumped into the pastoral communities, ideally, the pastoral community should have been thriving by now. So, it is something that we need to ask ourselves, why is it that, that we keep, when a drought happens, we keep asking the same question that, oh, now what should we do for them? Rather, why don't we actually ask ourselves that what is it that we are doing wrong, or what is it that we are missing out on?
Well, picking you up on that, Rupcha, it is that kind of top-down approach, isn't it, that is always used as a criticism against aid agencies, but also against governments as well. And I just wonder, are governments, are aid agencies talking to the herders, talking to the pastoralists and the agro-pastoralists and farmers to say what can happen, how can we work together? Is there that dialogue between all the groups? Carmen?
Okay. I believe that the donors and the aid agencies and the governments, I think they try to talk to each other, definitely, and talk to the pastoralists. But there are very strong power dynamics in there, whether you're willing to truly listen. And in some cases, I often wonder, is it that the solutions that are being asked for, if they don't fit within the donor's framework or time frame or their own operating restrictions, it's still not going to get funded. And increasingly, there are conversations about the lack of actual representation of pastoralists, not just as people speaking at these, but actually people in part of these institutions. I'll give an example. Some work that Mercy Corps did during this recent drought in Ethiopia. It's a large resilience program. They looked at the interventions, the impact of the interventions of people's resilience through this drought. And what they found really was those livestock keeping households that had become sedentary, they were much more vulnerable to that drought. Those that had maintained migration or had the ability to move their animals with, family members who were migrating, those animals survived. They were able to go and find those resources. Pastoralism itself, that the mobility is part of the resilience strategy. It is getting stressed now as land becomes less available for grazing or land becomes degraded and the frequency of these shocks is increasing. What we saw in the last drought is those who were able to move with their animals fared much better than those who had stayed behind. And I think bringing that pastoralist true perspective and appreciating that crop agriculture or settlement may not always be the best option. Until we appreciate that, I think we will constantly be offering solutions that encourage people to settle.
You're listening to Dynamic Drylands, the podcast about supporting change in the drylands of Africa and the Middle East.
So as we've been hearing, it's crucial that dialogue takes place. Development or aid organizations may miss the mark if they proffer solutions to herders without listening to them and understanding their needs. Worse, they risk creating new problems. And it's research involving repeated observations of the same group of people over prolonged periods of time, so-called longitudinal research, that some believe is critical when building a unique bank of research data about the drylands. Rupsha explains its significance.
In the pastoral areas, it's very important given that they're such a dynamic community, and the dynamism comes because of the nature and the way of life that it is, and they need to be dynamic in order to survive. And also the thing is that it also helps understand that the interventions that are being done, how effective or not effective they are, and how is it being used. Like, for example, we've been talking about the index-based livestock insurance. If we did not have a longitudinal panel data, we wouldn't have actually understood the welfare benefits of such a financial product, which was, number one, made for the pastoral community exclusively. And also, secondly, it was actually a huge experiment which was done because nobody had done actually, or nobody had designed a financial product which was intended for them. So this is actually something that helps understand, number one, that how are certain people behaving towards a certain intervention? How are people coping with shocks in this particular way? And then on top of that, what are the inter household dynamics that happen, or like certain decision-making aspects, which are as a result of certain interventions or no interventions at all. So I think this is what is important. And I would also mention that within this longitudinal research, it is very important to have certain qualitative elements and not just have like a survey based, so that you can understand things like power dynamics, you can understand things like decision-making process and gender dynamics within a household, which necessarily it cannot be captured if the research is like very short or very time bound. Yes, longitudinal research is expensive, but there are also different and innovative ways by which you can make it non-expensive and make it complementary. And like some of the work that is being done around like high frequency data can be a very good complementarity to that. Yeah.
Markets and trade are the economic engine of the drylands. They're a critical source of resilience, giving farmers and herders options to navigate an upcoming shock. But while selling livestock from the drylands can be lucrative, markets can also be hit by shocks, such as livestock disease, drought, and the recent COVID-19 related restrictions. Now, we've heard about a number of trade-related and market-based tools which can help herders manage uncertainty, such as index-based livestock insurance or ILRI. and these reach beyond the formal market. Many people in the drylands still depend on informal, under-the-radar markets, trade and financial arrangements. These are often ignored by policymakers, but they're very important to the people who use them. Supporting these existing arrangements will require governments and the aid sector to pay more attention to what is already happening in the drylands, a better understanding of what makes pastoral markets tick in order to help them become more effective, equal, and resilient. I'm Bola Mosuro. Thanks for listening to this episode of Dynamic Drylands. And thank you to today's guests, Dr. Rupsha Banerjee, Carmen Jacquez, and Dr. Kelvin Shikuku. We've talked a little about innovative ways of supporting farmers and herders. And in the fourth and final episode, we're going to explore some of the most exciting innovations which are changing people's lives and livelihoods in the drylands. From an app which its founders like to call the shepherd's eye in the sky, to how smartphones are changing how people support each other.
It is our collaboration with Google is also to use AI to determine the exactly weight, or at least approximation of the weight of the live animal, because sometimes another challenge that these communities face is the ability for them to determine the price of their animals. Now they can take a picture and put the kind of the breed that they have and at least come up to the nearest exactly weight of the animals and be able to determine how much they can benefit from their animals at the market prices.
Dynamic Drylands is produced by Loftus Media for SPARC, which is supporting pastoralism and agriculture in recurrent and protracted crises. SPARC aims to inform more effective policies and investments in the drylands of Africa and the Middle East. It is commissioned by the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and is managed by Cowater International in partnership with Corps, ODI, and the International Livestock Research Institute. Thank you to everyone who contributed to this series. For more information about the issues discussed in this podcast, visit the links in the show notes.